The scream that tore through the night in Columbus, New Mexico territory, would haunt Tabitha Allen for the rest of her days, but not for the reason most would think. She had heard countless women cry out in labor during her 7 years as a midwife, but this particular scream ended in a silence so complete, so final, that she knew even before she reached the small ranch house that death had arrived ahead of her. It was September 1885, and the desert air still held the day's heat even though the sun had set hours ago. Tabitha's horse thundered down the dusty trail, her medical bag secured tightly to the saddle. The ranch hand who had come for her, a young man named Pete with wild eyes, had told her that Mrs. Wade Hampton was having the baby early, that something was terribly wrong. What he had not told her, what perhaps he had not known, was that she was already too late to save the mother. The house was small but well maintained, the kind of home a man builds when he has hope for the future. Lanterns blazed in every window, casting long shadows across the yard where 3 ranch hands stood in a tight cluster, their hats in their hands. They parted silently as Tabitha dismounted, and she saw the truth written plainly on their weathered faces. Inside, the scene was worse than she had imagined. A woman lay still on a bed soaked with blood, her face peaceful in death, one hand resting on her swollen belly. Kneeling beside her was a man Tabitha recognized as Wade Hampton, a cattle rancher who had moved to the area 2 years prior with his young wife. His face was buried in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "Mr. Hampton," Tabitha said softly, moving quickly to the bedside. She placed her fingers against the woman's neck, confirming what she already knew. But then she felt it, a faint movement beneath the stretched skin of the dead woman's abdomen. "The baby," she said sharply. "Mr. Hampton, the baby is still alive." Wade's head snapped up, revealing a face ravaged by grief. He was perhaps 28 years old, with dark hair and eyes that had probably once been warm but now held nothing but anguish. "What? I can feel movement. I have to operate now, immediately. Go outside." "That's my wife," he said, his voice breaking. "That's Mary. And this is your child, and it is still alive. Go outside now or stay and help me, but I need an answer in the next 5 seconds. Something in Tabitha's voice, the absolute authority born of emergency, cut through Wade's shock. He stood on unsteady legs. "Tell me what to do." Tabitha had performed this procedure only once before, and that time she had failed to save the infant. But she had learned from that failure, had studied every text she could find on the subject, had practiced the incisions on animal carcasses until her landlady threatened to evict her. Now she moved with swift precision, laying out her instruments, instructing Wade to hold the lanterns closer, to keep his hands steady no matter what he saw. The surgery took less than 10 minutes, but each second felt like an eternity. When Tabitha finally pulled the infant from his mother's womb, he was blue and silent, the cord wrapped twice around his neck. She cut the cord with practiced efficiency, cleared the baby's mouth and nose, and began to rub his tiny chest vigorously. "Come on," she whispered. "Come on, little one. Breathe." Wade stood frozen, the lantern trembling in his grip, watching this stranger fight for his child's life over the body of his dead wife. The scene was surreal, nightmarish, and yet there was something almost sacred in the midwife's determination, in the fierce concentration on her face. The baby gasped, a small sound that grew into a wail. Tabitha felt tears spring to her eyes as she wrapped the infant in a clean blanket. He was small, too small, born at least a month early, but he was breathing and his cry was strong. "It's a boy," she said, turning to Wade. "You have a son." Wade set down the lantern with shaking hands and reached for the bundle. When Tabitha placed the baby in his arms, she saw something shift in his expression, saw the grief pushed aside momentarily by wonder. "He's so small," Wade whispered. "He came early. But his lungs sound good and his color is improving. He has a chance, Mr. Hampton. A good chance." Wade looked up at her and Tabitha saw tears streaming down his face. "She wanted a boy," he said. "Mary wanted a son. She said she'd name him William after her father." "William Hampton," Tabitha said softly. "It's a good name." The next hours were a blur of grim necessity. Tabitha cleaned and prepared Mary Hampton's body while Wade sat in the corner, holding his newborn son and staring at nothing. The ranch hands came in one by one to pay their respects to the woman who had brought light to this dusty corner of New Mexico, who had baked them pies and tended their wounds and treated them like family instead of hired help. As dawn broke over the desert, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Tabitha found herself facing a new crisis. The baby needed to eat, and soon. Without his mother's milk, he would not survive more than a day or two. "Mr. Hampton," she said gently, approaching him as he sat on the porch, still holding the sleeping infant. "William needs to eat. Do you have any cows with fresh milk?" Wade looked at her with exhausted, red-rimmed eyes. "We have a milk cow, Jenny. She calved 2 months ago. That's good." "Cow's milk is not ideal, but it can work. It will need to be diluted and warmed. I will need to stay for a few days to make sure he can tolerate it, to teach you how to feed him." "You would do that, Mr. Hampton. I did not save this child's life only to let him starve." "I will stay as long as necessary." Wade looked down at his son, then back at Tabitha. "I can't pay you much, not right away. The cattle drive is not until spring. We will work something out. Right now, let me focus on keeping William alive." The funeral was held the next day. Mary Hampton was laid to rest in the small cemetery on a hill overlooking the ranch, beneath a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The circuit preacher happened to be in Columbus, a stroke of luck that Wade did not feel particularly grateful for. The man said words about God's plan and eternal rest while Wade stood silent, holding his day-old son, his face like stone. Tabitha stood at a respectful distance, but when the service ended and the ranch hands began to fill in the grave, Wade walked directly to her. "Will you stand with me?" he asked quietly. "I don't want to be alone for this." So Tabitha stood beside this grieving widower and watched as they buried his wife, and she held the baby when Wade's hands shook too much to support him safely. She sang a soft lullaby when William began to fuss, and she did not comment on the tears that fell silently down Wade's face. That night, as Tabitha sat in the guest room that Mary Hampton had probably prepared with care for visiting family who would now never come, she wondered what she had gotten herself into. She was 25 years old, unmarried, and her entire life was in Columbus, where she rented a small house and maintained a practice that barely kept her fed. She could not stay at this ranch indefinitely. But when she looked in on the baby, sleeping in a drawer that had been lined with blankets to serve as a makeshift cradle, she knew she could not leave yet either. William Hampton was clinging to life by the thinnest of threads, and she was the only thing standing between him and the grave next to his mother's. The days fell into a rhythm. Tabitha woke every 2 hours through the night to prepare William's milk, diluting the cow's milk with water and a touch of molasses as her medical text suggested, warming it carefully and feeding it to him drop by drop from a clean cloth. Wade watched her those first few nights, learning the process, his face haggard with exhaustion and grief. "You should sleep," Tabitha told him on the 3rd night. "I can handle his feedings." "I need to learn," Wade said. "You won't be here forever." "I will be here until he is strong enough to survive without constant monitoring. That will be at least a few weeks." Wade ran a hand through his hair, and Tabitha noticed for the first time how young he actually was. Grief had aged him, carved lines around his eyes and mouth that probably had not been there a week ago. "A few weeks," he repeated. "And then what? I am a cattle rancher, Miss Allen. I have a ranch to run. I cannot wake every 2 hours to feed an infant. I cannot watch him every moment to make sure he is still breathing." It was the most he had said since the funeral, and the desperation in his voice was raw. "Then we will find a wet nurse," Tabitha said practically. "There must be a woman in Columbus or one of the surrounding areas who has milk and needs the work. I have already asked. Pete rode to town yesterday to inquire. There are no women available. The only one who recently had a child is Mrs. Rodriguez, and she has twins. She cannot take on another infant." Tabitha had not known this. She sat down in the rocking chair, suddenly feeling the weight of the responsibility she had taken on. "Then we will find another solution." "What solution?" Wade demanded, and she heard anger creeping into his voice for the first time. "What solution is there? I cannot keep this child alive on my own. I have tried to think of every possibility and there is none. He is going to die, just like his mother." "He is not going to die," Tabitha said firmly. "I will not allow it. You cannot stay here indefinitely playing nursemaid to my son. You have your own life, your own practice." "My practice consists mainly of delivering babies and treating minor ailments. I can do without it for a while." Wade stared at her. "Why would you do that?" "You do not know us. William is not your responsibility." Tabitha looked down at the baby in her arms, at his tiny face relaxed in sleep, at the impossibly small fingers curled against his chest. "I brought him into this world, Mr. Hampton. I cut him from his mother's womb and breathed life into his lungs. I am not in the habit of giving up on my patients." Something in Wade's expression softened. "I cannot ask you to sacrifice your life for mine. You did not ask. I am offering." They looked at each other across the small room, and Tabitha saw the exact moment when Wade's pride warred with his desperation and lost. "I cannot pay you what you deserve," he said quietly. "I do not need much. Room and board and whatever you can spare. We can work out the details when William is older and stronger." Wade closed his eyes, and when he opened them, Tabitha saw something that might have been hope. "A few weeks, you said, until he is stronger." "At least," Tabitha agreed, though in her heart she knew it would be longer than that. Much longer. The weeks passed, and William began to thrive. He gained weight slowly but steadily, his cries grew stronger, and the blue tinge around his mouth faded. Tabitha gradually increased the time between feedings and began to teach Wade the intricacies of infant care. Wade was an attentive student, his large, work-roughened hands surprisingly gentle, as he learned to change diapers and support the baby's head. Tabitha watched him discover fatherhood in small moments, saw the way his face softened when William wrapped a tiny fist around his finger, heard the wonder in his voice when the baby seemed to focus on his face. But she also saw the moments when grief would crash over him like a wave. He would be holding William and suddenly his eyes would fill with tears, or he would walk past the bedroom where Mary had died and his step would falter. Sometimes Tabitha would find him standing at the window, staring out at the cemetery on the hill, his jaw clenched tight. One evening, about a month after William's birth, Tabitha found Wade sitting on the porch after the baby had been put down for the night. It was October now, and the desert nights were growing cooler. He had a bottle of whiskey beside him, unopened. "May I join you?" Tabitha asked. Wade gestured to the empty chair beside him. "It is your porch as much as mine these days." Tabitha sat, pulling her shawl around her shoulders. They were silent for a long moment, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "I thought about drinking this tonight," Wade said finally, touching the bottle. Thought about drinking until I could not remember, until I could not feel anything. But you have not opened it. No, because William will wake in a few hours hungry and he needs me clear-headed. Wade picked up the bottle and turned it in his hands. Mary made me promise when we found out she was pregnant. No more drinking, she said. A father needs to be present, needs to be reliable. I gave her my word. She sounds like a wise woman. She was 23 years old, Wade said, and his voice cracked. 23. We had been married less than 3 years. We were supposed to grow old together, supposed to watch our children have children. How is this fair? Tabitha had no answer for that. Fairness had nothing to do with death. She had seen too much of it to believe otherwise. It is not fair, she said simply. It is a terrible, senseless tragedy, and you have every right to be angry. Wade looked at her, surprise evident on his face. The preacher said it was God's will, that she is in a better place. The preacher is an idiot, Tabitha said bluntly. God's will or not, your wife is dead and you are in pain. You are allowed to grieve, Mr. Hampton. You are allowed to be angry and lost and furious at the injustice of it all. Wade laughed, a bitter sound. You are not like any woman I have ever met, Miss Allen. I have seen too much death to dress it up in pretty words. Mary is gone, and that is a tragedy. But William is here, and he needs you. Both things can be true. Wade set the bottle down on the porch with a definitive thunk. Will you call me Wade? Mr. Hampton makes me feel like an old man. Only if you call me Tabitha. Tabitha, he repeated, as if testing the name. It suits you, strong and a bit old-fashioned. I will take that as a compliment. They sat together in comfortable silence, and Tabitha realized with some surprise that she had grown accustomed to this life. The ranch, the baby, the rhythm of days marked by feedings and diaper changes and small miracles of growth. She had not returned to Columbus except for one brief trip to collect more clothes and supplies and to inform her landlady that she would be away indefinitely. There had been no tearful goodbyes, no one who would miss her terribly. Her life, she realized, had been rather lonely. Here she felt needed, useful. William's smiles, rare and precious, filled her with a joy she had not known she was capable of feeling. And Wade's quiet gratitude, expressed in small gestures like making sure she had coffee in the morning or insisting she rest while he took over the baby's care, made her feel valued in a way her paying clients never had. It was dangerous, she knew. This was not her family. This was not her life. She was hired help, nothing more, and she needed to remember that. But as the weeks turned into months and autumn gave way to winter, it became harder and harder to maintain that distance. William was 4 months old when he laughed for the first time. It was a cold December morning, and Tabitha was bundling him up while Wade tried to make him smile by making ridiculous faces. The baby had been staring solemnly at his father, and then suddenly his face crinkled up and he let out a gurgling laugh. Wade froze, his eyes going wide. Did he just... He laughed, Tabitha said, smiling. He laughed at you. Wade scooped the baby up and spun him around, causing William to laugh again, a sound of pure joy. When he stopped, Wade was grinning wider than Tabitha had ever seen, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Did you hear that, Mary? He whispered, looking toward the window that faced the cemetery. Did you hear our boy laugh? Tabitha felt her own eyes sting with tears. She turned away to give Wade his moment of private grief and joy mixed together. When she turned back, he was looking at her with an expression she could not quite read. "Thank you," he said quietly. "If you had not stayed, I would not be here to see this. He would not be here at all." "You would have found a way," Tabitha said, uncomfortable with the gratitude in his voice. "No," Wade said firmly. "I would have failed him. I was ready to give up that first week, ready to believe that he would die no matter what I did. You would not let me give up. You would not let either of us give up. Tabitha did not know what to say to that, so she simply nodded and reached for the baby. We should get him fed before he decides to stop being so cheerful. But Wade did not immediately hand William over. Instead, he looked down at his son, then back at Tabitha and said, "Stay." "I am staying," Tabitha said, confused. "I am not going anywhere." "No, I mean really stay. Not as temporary help until William is stronger. Stay and help me raise him. He needs a mother, Tabitha. He needs you." The words hung in the air between them, shocking in their directness. Tabitha felt her heart begin to pound. "Wade, I am the midwife. I am here to help with William's care, but I am not his mother. I know that. William will always know who his mother was, but he needs more than I can give him. He needs someone who knows how to care for an infant, who can teach him things I cannot. He needs you. You are asking me to stay indefinitely, to give up my practice, my independence, my entire life to raise your son." Wade flinched at the harshness in her tone. "I am asking you to consider it. I know it is a tremendous thing to ask, but you have to see how good you are with him, how much he has thrived under your care. And I can see that you care for him too. You are not just doing this out of obligation anymore." He was right, and Tabitha hated that he was right. She had fallen in love with William Hampton, with his serious eyes and his rare smiles and the way he nestled against her chest when he was tired. The thought of leaving him, of going back to her empty house in Columbus and her sporadic practice, filled her with a grief she had not expected. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked carefully. Wade took a deep breath. "Move here permanently. Help me raise William. In return, you would have a home, security, and a salary when I can afford it. I know it is not much, but it is what I can offer. You are asking me to be a governess." "I am asking you to be part of this family," Wade corrected. "I know this is not conventional, but nothing about this situation is conventional." Tabitha walked to the window and stared out at the land she had come to know over the past months. The desert stretched out endlessly, beautiful in its starkness. She thought about her life in Columbus, about the loneliness that had become so familiar she barely noticed it anymore. She thought about William's laugh, about the way he reached for her now when he was upset, about how her days had become filled with purpose. "I need time to think about this," she said finally. "Of course, take all the time you need." But even as she said it, Tabitha knew what her answer would be. She gave it to him 3 days later, after she had ridden to Columbus to settle her affairs. She sold most of her furniture, paid off her landlady, and packed her medical supplies and personal belongings into 2 trunks. When she returned to the ranch, Wade was waiting on the porch, William in his arms. "I will stay," she said without preamble, "on 3 conditions." Wade's face lit up with relief. "Name them." "First, I want to continue practicing midwifery when I am needed. Columbus and the surrounding areas have few medical professionals, and women still need help delivering their babies. Of course, I would never ask you to give that up. Second, as William grows, I want us to be honest with him about who I am. I will not pretend to be his mother. He deserves to know the truth about Mary." Wade nodded, his expression serious. "I agree completely. Mary's memory will always be honored in this house. And third," Tabitha said, taking a deep breath, "I want a contract. Something in writing that specifies my role, my compensation, and my security here. I'm giving up everything to do this, Wade. I need to know that I will not be cast aside if you remarry or if circumstances change." Wade looked surprised, but then nodded slowly. "That is more than fair. I will have a lawyer draw up something formal. You will always have a home here, Tabitha. I give you my word." "Then I accept your offer." Wade smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes for the first time since Mary's death. "Welcome home, Tabitha." The winter passed, and spring brought the cattle drive Wade had been preparing for. He would be gone for 6 weeks, taking his herd to market in Santa Fe. The money from the sale would determine the ranch's fortunes for the year and would allow him to finally pay Tabitha a proper salary. The night before he left, Wade sat Tabitha down after William had been put to bed. "I am leaving Pete here," he said. "Along with 2 other hands. They know to follow your instructions if anything comes up. The house is yours to run as you see fit." "We will be fine," Tabitha assured him. "William and I will be here when you return." Wade hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. "This is for emergencies. There is enough money here to handle anything that might come up. And if something happens to me out there, there are instructions with my lawyer in Columbus. The ranch, everything, goes to William, with you as trustee until he comes of age." "Nothing is going to happen to you," Tabitha said firmly, though her heart clenched at the thought. "Life has taught me to plan for the worst," Wade said quietly. "Promise me if something happens you will stay, you will raise William. He will need you more than ever." "I promise," Tabitha said and meant it. "But you are coming back, Wade Hampton. Your son needs his father." Wade looked at her for a long moment, and Tabitha saw something shift in his expression, something she could not quite name. "I will be back," he said. "I have more reason to return than I have had in a long time." He left before dawn, riding out with his men and the herd in a cloud of dust and the sound of lowing cattle. Tabitha stood on the porch with William in her arms, watching until they disappeared over the horizon. "It is just us now, little one," she whispered to the baby. "We will take good care of things until your papa comes home." The weeks passed slowly. Tabitha threw herself into managing the household, maintaining the garden Mary had planted, and caring for William, who was growing more active and alert every day. He started rolling over, then learned to sit up with support. Each milestone was a small miracle, and Tabitha found herself wishing Wade was there to witness them. She wrote him letters, knowing he would receive them only when the drive passed through towns, detailing William's progress and the daily happenings at the ranch. She did not expect replies, but she found herself looking forward to his return with an intensity that surprised her. It was not just that she had become accustomed to his presence, though she had. It was something more, something she was afraid to examine too closely. Wade Hampton had become more than her employer over the past months. He had become her friend, her partner in raising William, the person she most wanted to share good news with. The realization that she was developing feelings for him came one evening as she sat rocking William to sleep. She was humming the lullaby Wade always sang, thinking about how his voice would join hers when he was home, and she felt a longing so acute it took her breath away. This was dangerous territory. Wade was her employer, and more than that, he was a grieving widower. His heart belonged to his dead wife, and Tabitha had no right to these feelings. She needed to bury them deep, to maintain the professional distance she had let slip over the months. But the heart, she was learning, does not always listen to logic. Wade returned in late April, thinner and sun-weathered but smiling. The cattle drive had been successful, and he carried with him a bank draft that represented more money than Tabitha had ever seen. "We did well," he told her that first night after he had spent an hour playing with William, marveling at how much the baby had grown. "Better than I hoped. The ranch is secure for the year with enough left over to make improvements and pay you properly." "I am glad," Tabitha said, and she was. But what she was most glad about was simply having him home. Over the next weeks, Wade threw himself into ranch work with renewed energy. He hired more hands, bought new breeding stock, and began planning improvements to the house and barn. And every evening, he would come home dusty and tired and head straight for William, his face lighting up at his son's delighted squeals. "He missed you," Tabitha said one evening, watching Wade toss the baby gently in the air while William shrieked with laughter. "I missed him too," Wade said. "I missed this. Missed home." He caught her eye when he said it, and Tabitha felt her cheeks warm. She turned away, busying herself with preparing dinner. The contract Wade had promised was drawn up by a lawyer in Columbus and presented to Tabitha in early May. It was more generous than she had dared hope, guaranteeing her a salary, a percentage of the ranch's profits, and security of tenure for as long as she wished to stay. There was even a provision for a pension should she choose to leave when William was grown. "This is too much," Tabitha protested, reading through the document. "It is what you deserve," Wade said firmly. "You gave up everything to help me raise my son. This is the least I can do." Tabitha signed the contract with shaking hands, feeling for the first time that she truly had a future, a security she had never known before. As summer arrived, the ranch thrived. The spring calves were healthy, the cattle were fat on good grass, and Wade's reputation as a fair and competent rancher grew. He hired a local woman, Mrs. Chen, to help with the heavier housework, giving Tabitha more time to focus on William and to occasionally travel to Columbus or nearby ranches when her skills as a midwife were needed. It was on one of these trips, in late June, that things began to shift between her and Wade. Tabitha had been called to a difficult birth at her ranch 20 miles away and had been gone for 2 days. The delivery had been complicated, and she returned exhausted but satisfied that both mother and baby were doing well. It was late evening when she rode into the yard, surprised to see Wade pacing on the porch with a fussing William in his arms. "Thank God," Wade said when he saw her. "He has been crying for hours. Nothing I do comforts him. I think he is ill." Tabitha dismounted quickly and took the baby, her experienced hands checking him over. "He is teething," she said after a moment. "See, his gums are swollen. He is not sick, just uncomfortable." "Teething," Wade repeated, relief evident in his voice. "I thought something was terribly wrong." He would not stop crying. "He missed me," Tabitha said, bouncing William gently. The baby immediately began to calm, nestling against her chest with a shuddering sigh. "He has become accustomed to my presence." "He is not the only one," Wade said quietly. Tabitha looked up sharply, but Wade had already turned away, heading back into the house. She followed slowly, her heart pounding. Over the next weeks, Tabitha began to notice small changes in Wade's behavior. He found excuses to be near her, to help with William's care even when she did not need help. He asked her opinion on ranch matters, treated her input as valuable. He began to smile more, to laugh at William's antics, to engage with life in a way he had not since Mary's death. And sometimes, when he thought she was not looking, Tabitha would catch him watching her with an expression that made her heart skip. It all came to a head on a warm evening in July. William had been put to bed, and Tabitha was sitting on the porch enjoying the cooler evening air when Wade joined her with 2 glasses of lemonade. "Thank you," she said, accepting the glass. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the desert at night. Finally, Wade spoke. "It has been almost a year since Mary died." Tabitha did not know what to say to that, so she simply waited. "The first months I thought the grief would kill me," Wade continued. "I could not see a future, could not imagine going on. And then you came and you brought me back to life. Not just William, but you, your strength, your determination, your kindness. You reminded me that life continues, that there are still things worth living for." "Wade," Tabitha began, but he held up a hand. "Please, let me finish. I know this is complicated. I know I am still grieving Mary, that I will probably always grieve her. But these past months, I have come to care for you, Tabitha, as more than just the woman helping me raise my son. You have become essential to my life, to my happiness. And I need to know if you feel the same." Tabitha's hands were shaking. "I do," she whispered. "I have tried to maintain distance, but I cannot help it. I care for you, Wade, more than is probably wise." Wade set down his glass and moved closer, taking her hand in his. "I am not asking you to replace Mary. No one could, but I would like to build something new, something different with you, if you will have me." "What are you asking?" Tabitha said, her voice barely audible. "I am asking if you would consider becoming my wife." "Not right away. I know it is too soon for that. But eventually, when we have both had time to be sure. I am asking if you can see a future with me, with William, as a real family." Tabitha looked down at their joined hands, at the calluses on Wade's fingers from ranch work, at the strength in his grip. She thought about the past year, about how this man had somehow become the center of her world. She thought about William, asleep inside, and how the three of them had become a unit, a family in all but name. "Yes," she said, looking up to meet Wade's eyes. "Yes, I can see that future. I want that future." Wade's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You have made me happier than I thought I would ever be again." They sat together on the porch until the stars came out, talking about the future, about their hopes and fears, about how they would navigate this new relationship while honoring Mary's memory. It was not a simple conversation, and there were tears on both sides, but by the end of it, Tabitha felt a peace she had not known since accepting Wade's offer to stay. They courted slowly, carefully, always mindful of appearances and of the memories that still lingered in the house. Wade was patient and gentle, never pushing for more than Tabitha was ready to give. They held hands when William was asleep, stole brief kisses in the barn, wrote each other notes that were equal parts sweet and practical. The ranch hands noticed, of course, but they kept their opinions to themselves. Pete, who had been with Wade since before Mary's death, told Tabitha one day that he was glad to see his boss happy again. "He is a good man," Pete said. "He deserves some joy after all he has been through. And you are good for him, Miss Allen. Good for both of them." In September, on the anniversary of Mary's death and William's birth, Wade and Tabitha took flowers to the cemetery together. Wade knelt at the grave and spoke quietly to his first wife, telling her about her son, about his life, about the woman who had saved them both. "I will always love you, Mary," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I need to move forward. I hope you understand. I hope you would be happy for us." Tabitha stood back, giving him privacy, but when he rose, he reached for her hand and pulled her close. "Mary would have liked you," he said. "She always valued strength and kindness, and you have both in abundance." That night, as they sat together watching William play with a wooden horse Wade had carved, Wade spoke again about marriage. "I would like to marry in the spring," he said. "If you are agreeable, after William's first birthday, I think that would be appropriate." "Spring sounds perfect," Tabitha agreed, her heart full. The winter was hard that year, with blizzards that isolated the ranch for days at a time. But inside the house, there was warmth and love and the sound of a baby learning to walk, falling down and getting back up with determined squeals. Wade and Tabitha grew closer through the long, dark nights, learning each other's habits and quirks, building a foundation of friendship and respect beneath the growing love. William took his first steps on Christmas morning, lurching from Tabitha's arms into Wade's with a look of delighted surprise. They both cried, overcome with emotion at this milestone, and later that day, Wade gave Tabitha a ring that had belonged to his grandmother. "I wanted to give you something that is not Mary's," he said, "something that can be just ours." The ring fit perfectly, and Tabitha wore it with pride. They were married on a sunny April day in 1887 with William, now 19 months old, toddling around at their feet during the ceremony. The circuit preacher who had buried Mary married them in the same house where William had been born, in front of the ranch hands and a few neighbors from surrounding ranches. Tabitha wore a simple blue dress and carried wildflowers picked that morning. Wade wore his best suit and could not stop smiling. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Wade kissed Tabitha gently, then scooped up William and kissed him too, making the toddler giggle. "We are a family now," Wade whispered to both of them. "A real family." The reception was simple but joyful, with food and music and dancing in the yard. Tabitha danced with Wade as the sun set, William asleep on Pete's shoulder nearby, and she thought about how far she had come from that terrible night when she had cut a baby from his dead mother's womb. Life had given them all a second chance, and they were going to make the most of it. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch prospered under Wade's careful management, growing from a modest operation to one of the most successful in the territory. Tabitha continued her midwifery practice, becoming known throughout the region as the woman to call when a birth was difficult. She saved more lives than she lost, and found deep satisfaction in the work. William grew into a bright, active child who had his father's dark hair and his mother's gentle spirit. Tabitha told him stories about Mary, showed him the few photographs Wade had kept, made sure he knew who his birth mother had been and how much she had wanted him. But William called Tabitha Mama and clearly adored her, following her around the house and crying when she had to leave for a birth. 2 years after their wedding, Tabitha found herself pregnant. The irony was not lost on her, the midwife who had delivered hundreds of babies finally carrying her own. Wade was overjoyed and terrified in equal measure, the memory of Mary's death still fresh enough to cause nightmares. "I cannot lose you," he told Tabitha, his hands shaking as he held her. "I cannot go through that again." "You will not lose me," Tabitha said firmly. "I know my own body and I know the warning signs. I will take every precaution." She did, limiting her work as the pregnancy progressed, resting when she needed to, and consulting with a doctor in Las Cruces, who confirmed that everything was progressing normally. Wade hovered over her anxiously, driving her to distraction with his worry, until she finally banned him from asking how she felt more than once per day. Their daughter was born in February 1889, after a labor that was long but mercifully uncomplicated. Wade was there through all of it, holding Tabitha's hand and whispering encouragement, and when the baby finally emerged, howling and healthy, he wept with relief. They named her Rose after Wade's mother, and she had Tabitha's red-gold hair and Wade's brown eyes. William, now 4 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with every aspect of her care. "Gentle," Tabitha would remind him as he stroked Rose's fuzzy head. "She is very small." "I was small too," William informed her seriously. "Papa said I was tiny when I was born." "You were," Wade agreed, ruffling his son's hair. "But you grew big and strong, just like Rose will." As the 1880s gave way to the 1890s, the Hampton ranch became known not just for its cattle, but for the family who ran it. Wade's reputation for fairness meant he never lacked for good ranch hands. Tabitha's skill as a midwife meant she was respected throughout the territory. And their children, William and Rose, were growing up healthy and loved, the promise of the future. They had more children. 2 more sons born in 1891 and 1894, whom they named Thomas and Daniel. The house expanded to accommodate the growing family, with additions built onto the original structure. The land that had once held so much grief became filled with the sounds of children's laughter, of horses and cattle, of life lived fully. William, as he grew older, showed an aptitude for ranching that made Wade proud. He also inherited Tabitha's curiosity and compassion, often helping her with her midwifery work, learning the basics of medicine and care. By the time he was 12, he was talking about becoming a doctor, and Wade and Tabitha began saving money to send him to medical school when he was old enough. Rose was bright and fierce, a child who knew her own mind and was not afraid to speak it. She learned to ride before she could properly read, and could rope a calf almost as well as the ranch hands by the time she was 8. Tabitha saw echoes of Mary in her daughter sometimes, in the determined set of her jaw and the way she approached problems head-on, and she wondered if spirits somehow lingered, if Mary's strength had somehow passed to this child who had never known her. The younger boys, Thomas and Daniel, were a matched set of trouble and joy, always into something but so charming that it was hard to stay angry at them for long. They worshipped their older brother and followed him everywhere, much to William's alternating annoyance and delight. On William's 15th birthday in September 1900, the family rode up to the cemetery on the hill. It had become a tradition, this annual visit, a way to honor the woman who had given her life so that William could live. "She would be proud of you," Wade told his son, standing at Mary's grave. "You have grown into a fine young man, kind, hardworking, intelligent, everything a mother could hope for." William, who had heard stories about Mary all his life but had no memory of her, placed flowers on the grave. "I wish I could have known her. She is part of you," Tabitha said gently. "In your eyes, your smile, the way you care about people. She lives on through you." As they rode back to the ranch, Rose and the younger boys racing ahead, William rode beside Tabitha. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for everything you have done. I know you are not my birth mother, but you are the only mother I have ever known, and I could not have asked for a better one." Tabitha felt tears spring to her eyes. "It has been my honor to raise you, William. You and your sister and brothers are the greatest joy of my life." That evening, as Tabitha and Wade sat on the porch watching the sunset, something they still did most evenings when weather permitted, Wade took her hand. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Giving up your independence, your life in Columbus to stay here?" Tabitha thought about the lonely woman she had been 15 years ago, about the small, empty life she had led. She thought about the family she had gained, the children she had raised, the man she had built a life with. "Not for a single moment," she said honestly. "This is where I was meant to be, with you, with our children. This is home." Wade raised her hand to his lips and kissed it, a gesture that had become familiar over the years but never lost its power to move her. "I love you, Tabitha Hampton. I think I have from almost the beginning, though it took me time to admit it." "I love you too," Tabitha said. "I always will." The years continued to pass, bringing their share of joys and sorrows. Wade's father died in 1902, leaving them a small inheritance that they put toward William's education. Tabitha's mother, who had been estranged from her for years, reached out shortly before her own death in 1903, and Tabitha was able to make peace with her before the end. The ranch continued to prosper, weathering droughts and hard winters and the changing economics of the cattle industry. William left for medical school in St. Louis in 1903, a bittersweet departure that left the whole family in tears. But he wrote faithfully, and returned each summer to help with the ranch, and to practice his growing medical skills on anyone who needed them. Rose, showing no interest in leaving the ranch, took over more and more of its daily management as she grew older, proving herself every bit as capable as any man. She was courted by several local ranchers' sons but rejected them all, declaring that she had no interest in being any man's wife if it meant giving up her independence. "She is too much like you," Wade told Tabitha, half amused and half exasperated. Stubborn and independent. "And that is a bad thing," Tabitha challenged. "Not at all," Wade said, pulling her close. "It is one of the things I love most about you." Thomas and Daniel both showed aptitude for different aspects of ranching, with Thomas gravitating toward the business side and Daniel toward the actual cattle work. Between the 3 children who stayed, the ranch's future seemed secure. In 1908, William returned from medical school with his degree and a new wife, a young woman named Catherine whom he had met in St. Louis. She was a teacher, practical and kind, and Tabitha liked her immediately. They settled in Columbus, where William opened a medical practice that quickly became successful. "You started this," William told Tabitha at the opening of his office. "If you had not been a midwife, if you had not shown me the importance of medicine and caring for people, I never would have chosen this path." Tabitha, now 50 years old and with threads of gray in her red gold hair, hugged her son tight. "I am so proud of you. Your birth mother would be proud too." As the 1910s dawned, Tabitha and Wade found themselves in the unusual position of having time to themselves. Rose was fully capable of managing the ranch, Thomas was handling the business affairs, and Daniel was overseeing the cattle operations. William was established in his practice in Columbus and had made them grandparents twice over. "We are getting old," Wade said one evening, looking at his weathered hands. "We are getting older," Tabitha corrected. "There is a difference. I am 53 years old. You are 52. Our children are grown. What do we do now?" Tabitha smiled. "We enjoy it. We have worked hard all our lives. Maybe it is time to slow down a bit, to travel, to do the things we never had time for." They did travel, taking a trip to San Francisco that would have been unthinkable in their younger years. They rode trains and stayed in hotels and saw the Pacific Ocean for the first time. They visited William in St. Louis and met their granddaughters properly, spending a month there and returning home exhausted but happy. But the ranch was always where they returned, the land that had witnessed their grief and their joy, their struggles and their triumphs. It was home in the deepest sense, and they could not imagine being anywhere else. In 1914, on a warm September evening, the entire family gathered at the ranch for William's birthday. He was 29 years old now, a successful doctor with a growing family of his own. Rose was 25 and had finally agreed to marry a neighboring rancher, though she had made it clear she was keeping her own brand and her own land. Thomas was 23 and courting the schoolteacher from Columbus. Daniel was 20 and showed no signs of settling down, too in love with the ranch and the work to think about anything else. As Tabitha looked around at her family, at the children and grandchildren, at Wade beside her with his arm around her waist, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. The path that had brought her here had been unexpected, born of tragedy and death, but it had led to more happiness than she had ever imagined possible. "What are you thinking about?" Wade asked quietly. "About how life is strange," Tabitha said. "About how the worst night of my life led to the best years of my life. About how grateful I am for all of it." Wade pulled her closer. "I am grateful too, for you, for William, for all of this. You saved me, Tabitha. You and William both. I was drowning in grief and you threw me a lifeline." "We saved each other," Tabitha said. "That is what family does." As the sun set over the New Mexico desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold, the Hampton family sat together on the porch, multiple generations joined in love and laughter. Inside the house, the room where Mary had died and William had been born had been converted into a bright, cheerful parlor, the darkness of the past transformed into light. Wade and Tabitha sat close together, their hands intertwined, watching their family with quiet contentment. They had built something good here, something lasting. Out of death had come life, out of grief had come joy, and out of necessity had come the deepest love either of them had ever known. "You remember," Tabitha said softly, "that night when you asked me to stay?" "Every detail," Wade replied. "I was terrified you would say no. I was terrified to say yes, but it was the best decision I ever made." "Mine too," Wade said, kissing her temple. "Mine too." The stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, and the family slowly drifted inside, leaving Wade and Tabitha alone on the porch. It was their favorite time of day, this quiet moment when the work was done and they could simply be together. "I love you, Tabitha Hampton," Wade said, as he had said countless times over the years. "I love you too, Wade Hampton," Tabitha replied, the words as true as the first time she had spoken them. "Always and forever." They sat together in the gathering darkness, two people who had found each other in the midst of tragedy and built a life filled with love. The ranch stretched out around them, the land they had worked and nurtured, and somewhere on the hill, Mary Hampton rested in peace. Her son grown into a man she would have been proud of, her husband happy with a woman who honored her memory while building her own. It was not the ending anyone could have predicted that terrible September night in 1885, when a midwife arrived too late to save a mother, but just in time to save a son. But it was a good ending, a happy ending, proof that even in the darkest moments, hope and love can find a way to flourish. The next morning dawned bright and clear, and the Hampton household stirred to life with its usual controlled chaos. Tabitha woke early, as she always did, and lay for a moment listening to Wade's steady breathing beside her. 27 years of marriage, and she still found comfort in his presence, in the solid reliability of him. She rose quietly and went to the window, looking out over the land that had become so familiar. The ranch had grown considerably over the years, now encompassing several thousand acres. The original small house had been expanded multiple times, and there were now several outbuildings, a large barn, corrals, and even a small bunkhouse for the hands. In the kitchen, Tabitha started coffee and began preparing breakfast. Mrs. Chen had retired several years ago, and while they had help with the heavy work, Tabitha still enjoyed the morning ritual of cooking for her family. Rose appeared soon after, already dressed for a day of ranch work. "Morning, Mama," she said, kissing Tabitha's cheek. "Something smells good." "Just biscuits and bacon. Will you be here for dinner?" "Should be. We are moving the cattle to the north pasture today, but we should be done by evening." Wade came in next, followed by Daniel, and soon the kitchen was full of conversation and the sounds of a family meal. These were the moments Tabitha treasured most, the ordinary, everyday interactions that made up a life. After breakfast, as Wade prepared to ride out with Daniel and Rose, he stopped to kiss Tabitha goodbye. It was a ritual they had maintained for nearly 3 decades, never parting without that small gesture of affection. "I will be back by supper," he promised. "I will be here," Tabitha replied, as she always did. She spent the morning working in the garden Mary had first planted, which Tabitha had expanded and maintained over the years. It gave her pleasure to work the soil, to nurture growing things, to see the literal fruits of her labor. She was harvesting tomatoes when a rider appeared in the distance. As the rider drew closer, Tabitha recognized Pete, who had retired from ranch work 5 years ago but still lived in a small house on the property. He was riding faster than his years should allow, and Tabitha felt a flutter of concern. "Mrs. Hampton," Pete called as he approached. "There is a woman in labor in Columbus. Her husband came looking for you, says the baby is coming early and she is scared." Tabitha did not hesitate. "Tell him I will be there within the hour. I need to gather my supplies." She had her medical bag ready in minutes, a routine she had perfected over decades of practice. She left a note for Wade, saddled her horse, and rode toward Columbus with the woman's husband, a young man named Jack who looked terrified. "It is her first baby," he explained as they rode. "She is only 7 months along. The doctor is in Las Cruces delivering another baby, and we heard you were the best." "I will do everything I can," Tabitha promised. The birth was indeed premature, but Tabitha had delivered many such babies over the years. She drew on all her experience, all her knowledge, and after several tense hours, a tiny but breathing baby girl entered the world. She was small, so small, but her lungs were strong and her cry was indignant. "She is early, but she is a fighter," Tabitha told the exhausted mother. "With proper care, she has an excellent chance." She stayed through the night and into the next day, making sure both mother and baby were stable, teaching the young father how to care for his premature daughter. It was late afternoon when she finally rode back toward the ranch, tired but satisfied. As she crested the hill that looked down on the ranch, Tabitha paused to take in the view. The house with its various additions, the barn and corrals, the fields and pastures, the cemetery on the far hill where Mary rested. This was her life, the world she and Wade had built together. Wade was waiting on the porch when she rode in, and the relief on his face when he saw her was evident. "Long birth?" he asked, helping her dismount. "Premature baby, but both mother and child are doing well." Tabitha leaned against him, suddenly aware of how tired she was. "I am getting too old for these all-night vigils." "You will never be too old to help bring babies into the world," Wade said, holding her close. "It is who you are." That evening, as they sat together after dinner, Tabitha found herself thinking about time and legacy. She was 52 years old, and while she was still healthy and active, she was acutely aware that more years lay behind her than ahead. "What do you want to do with the rest of our lives?" she asked Wade. He looked at her in surprise. "What brought this on, that baby today?" She was so small, so fragile, but so determined to live. "It made me think about life, about how precious it is, about how we should not waste the time we have." Wade was quiet for a moment, then said, "I want to spend every day I have left with you. Whether that means working the ranch, traveling, or just sitting on this porch watching the sunset. As long as I am with you, I am content." "That is a good answer," Tabitha said, smiling. "I feel the same way." They made plans that night, dreams for the future that included more travel, spending more time with their grandchildren, and perhaps even writing down their story so that future generations would know how their family had begun. "Someone should know," Tabitha said. "About Mary, about William's birth, about how we all came together. It is an important story." "Then you should write it," Wade said. "You were there for all of it. You brought William into the world, you saved his life, you helped me build this family. It is your story as much as anyone's." So Tabitha began to write, sitting at the desk in the parlor in the evenings, carefully recording the events of that terrible and wonderful night in September 1885, and all that had followed. She wrote about Mary, making sure her memory was preserved in more than just Wade's stories and William's imagination. She wrote about the desperate early days of William's life, about falling in love with Wade, about building a family and a life in the harsh but beautiful New Mexico desert. It took her nearly a year to finish, riding in between her midwifery calls and the daily work of the ranch. When it was done, she showed it to Wade, who read it with tears streaming down his face. "This is perfect," he said when he finished. "This is exactly how it should be remembered. Mary's sacrifice, William's strength, your courage, our love. All of it." They had several copies made and gave them to their children. William read it and wept, finally understanding fully the circumstances of his birth and his mother's death. Rose read it and looked at Tabitha with new respect. Thomas and Daniel read it together and came away with a deeper appreciation for the family they were part of. "You should have this published," William said. "Other women could benefit from reading about your techniques, about how you saved me and all those other babies." But Tabitha shook her head. "This is for our family. Some things are too personal, too precious to share with the world." As 1915 turned into 1916, life on the ranch continued its steady rhythm. Rose married her rancher in a small ceremony at the ranch, and Tabitha wept at how beautiful her daughter looked. Thomas married his schoolteacher a few months later, and they settled in Columbus, where he opened a store supplying ranch equipment. Daniel, true to form, showed no signs of marrying, completely devoted to the ranch and the cattle. "Someone has to carry on the family business," he told Tabitha, "and I am happy to do it." William's practice continued to thrive, and he and Catherine gave Wade and Tabitha 2 more grandchildren, bringing the total to 5. The house was often full of visiting children and grandchildren, and Tabitha loved every chaotic moment. But her favorite times were still the quiet evenings on the porch with Wade, watching the sun set over the land they loved, holding hands and talking about everything and nothing. "You ever think about that night?" Wade asked one evening. "The night William was born." "Sometimes," Tabitha admitted. "Usually when I am at a difficult birth. I remember how scared I was, how certain I was that I would lose him too. And then I remember how it felt when he took that first breath, when I knew he would live." "You gave me my son," Wade said quietly. "And then you gave me my life back. I will never be able to repay you for that." "You do not need to repay me," Tabitha said. "You have given me more than I ever dreamed of having. A family, a home, a purpose, and a love I never expected to find. We are even." Wade smiled and pulled her close. "I suppose we are." In 1920, the ranch celebrated its 35th anniversary, marking the year Wade and Mary had first settled there. It was also the 35th anniversary of William's birth and Mary's death, and the family gathered for a special remembrance. They rode up to the cemetery together, 3 generations strong, and Wade told stories about Mary that he had never shared before. He talked about her dreams for the ranch, her hopes for their children, her fierce love of life. "She was taken too soon," Wade said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "But her legacy lives on in William and all of you. She would be so proud of the family we have become." William, now 35 years old and the image of his father, placed flowers on his mother's grave. "Thank you," he said simply, "for giving me life, even at the cost of your own. I have tried to live in a way that would honor that sacrifice." Later, as the family gathered at the ranch for dinner, Tabitha looked around the table at the faces she loved. Wade at the head of the table, his hair now completely gray but his eyes still warm. William and Catherine and their children. Rose and her husband, Thomas and his wife. Daniel, still stubbornly single, and all the grandchildren, ranging from toddlers to teenagers. This was what she and Wade had built. This was the legacy of that terrible September night and the choice she had made to stay. A family, large and loving and strong, rooted in this harsh land but flourishing despite all odds. "I want to make a toast," Wade said, standing and raising his glass. "To Mary, who gave us William and who will never be forgotten. To Tabitha, who saved William and who saved me. To our children and grandchildren, who are the future of this ranch and this family. And to love, which can grow even in the darkest soil and bloom into something beautiful." "To love," they all echoed, and Tabitha felt tears running down her face. As the years continued to pass, Wade and Tabitha gradually stepped back from the daily operations of the ranch, trusting it to their children's capable hands. They traveled when they could, visiting William in St. Louis, taking a trip to California to see the ocean again, even venturing as far as New York City once, though they both agreed they preferred the wide open spaces of home. But mostly they stayed at the ranch, content to watch their family grow and thrive. They became the family's historians, the keepers of stories, the ones the grandchildren came to when they wanted to hear about the old days. Tabitha continued her midwifery practice well into her 60s, though she limited it to local births and emergencies. She had trained several younger women over the years, passing on her knowledge and skills, and she took pride in knowing that her legacy would continue even after she was gone. In 1925, on their 38th wedding anniversary, Wade surprised Tabitha with a gift. He had commissioned a portrait of the two of them, painted from a photograph taken the previous year. In the portrait, they sat together on the porch, Wade's arm around Tabitha's shoulders, both of them smiling at the camera. "So our grandchildren and great-grandchildren will remember us," Wade said. "Not as we are now, old and gray, but as we were, still in love after all these years." "We are not so old," Tabitha protested, though she was touched by the gesture, "and I do not mind the gray. We have earned every one of these years." The portrait was hung in the parlor, and it became a centerpiece of the home, a symbol of enduring love and partnership. As the 1920s drew to a close, William came home for a visit with surprising news. He had been offered a position as a professor of medicine at a university in Chicago. It was a tremendous opportunity, but it would mean moving even farther away. "I wanted to talk to you and Papa before making a decision," William told them. "This ranch, this family, it means everything to me. I do not want to lose connection to my roots." "You could never lose that," Tabitha assured him. "Your roots are part of you no matter where you go, and this is wonderful news, William. You should absolutely accept." "Your mother is right," Wade said. "We are proud of you, son. Always have been, always will be. Go to Chicago, teach the next generation of doctors, and come home when you can. We will be here." William accepted the position, and in 1929 he moved to Chicago with his family. It was bittersweet, having him so far away, but Tabitha took comfort in his success, and in knowing that the skills she had first inspired in him were being passed on to others. The 1930s brought challenges, with the Depression affecting even the remote ranches of New Mexico. But the Hamptons had always been careful with their money, and they weathered the hard times better than many. They even hired on a few desperate men who showed up looking for work, feeding them and paying them what they could, remembering how important kindness had been to their own story. Rose and her husband's ranch merged with the Hampton spread, creating one of the largest operations in the territory. Daniel took over most of the management, proving himself every bit as capable as his father had been. Thomas's business in Columbus struggled but survived, sustained by the community's loyalty to a family that had always treated them fairly through it all. Wade and Tabitha remained constants, the foundation the family returned to again and again. Their love for each other never wavered, growing deeper and more comfortable with each passing year. In 1935, on the 50th anniversary of William's birth and Mary's death, the family held another gathering at the ranch. William came from Chicago with his now adult children. Rose and Daniel brought their families. Thomas and his wife drove in from Columbus, and there were grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren running around. They went to the cemetery together, this huge extended family, and Wade spoke about Mary with the wisdom of age and distance. 50 years ago today, I lost the woman I loved and gained the son who would carry on our name," he said. "I thought my life was over. I could not imagine a future without Mary, but life had other plans. Tabitha came into our lives, saved William, and eventually saved me too. We built something here, something Mary would have been proud of. A family, a legacy, a testament to the power of love and resilience. He turned to Tabitha, taking her hand. Thank you for 50 years of raising my son, for 38 years of marriage, for a lifetime of love. You are the greatest blessing I never knew I needed. Tabitha, now 75 years old, smiled through her tears. And thank you for asking me to stay, for giving me a family, a purpose, a life more rich and full than I ever imagined possible. William stepped forward, now 50 years old himself, a distinguished professor with gray threading through his dark hair. I want to thank both of you, Papa, for your love and guidance, and Mama Tabitha for literally giving me life and then showing me how to live it well. Everything I am, everything I have accomplished, started with the two of you refusing to give up on a tiny, premature baby who should not have survived. There was not a dry eye among them as the family embraced. Multiple generations joined in love and shared history. That night, as Wade and Tabitha lay in bed, he held her close and said, I am 78 years old. I have lived a good life, a full life, and I owe most of that to you. We still have time, Tabitha said, though she knew that time was becoming more precious with each passing day. We still have more life to live together. I know, Wade said, and I intend to live every moment of it loving you. They did have more time, though not as much as they would have liked. Wade passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1937 at the age of 80. Tabitha woke to find him beside her, his face peaceful, one hand still reaching for hers even in death. The grief was crushing, but different from the grief Wade had experienced when Mary died. This was the grief of having loved deeply and completely, of having shared 52 years of life with someone, of losing a partner and best friend. The family gathered for the funeral, and Wade was buried beside Mary on the hill overlooking the ranch. At the service, William spoke about his father's strength and kindness, about how he had honored Mary's memory while building a new life, about how he had been a father not just to William but to all his children. He taught me that love is not finite, William said. That you can love more than one person, that opening your heart to new love does not diminish what came before. He loved my birth mother, and he loved Mama Tabitha, and there was room in his heart for both. After the funeral, Tabitha moved into town to live with Thomas and his wife. She could not bear to stay at the ranch without Wade, though she visited often. Daniel and his family moved into the main house, taking over full operation of the ranch. Tabitha lived another 5 years, staying active and mentally sharp until the end. She continued to attend births when called upon, though mostly she served as an advisor to the younger midwives. She spent time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling them stories about the old days, about their grandfather and their grandmother Mary, about the ranch and how it had grown. She also spent time with William when he visited from Chicago, the two of them sharing memories of Wade and of that first year when it had been just the three of them against the world. You know, William said during one of these visits, I have delivered hundreds of babies in my career, but I have never stopped marveling at it, at the miracle of birth, at the strength of mothers and the resilience of infants. And I trace that wonder back to you, to the story you told me about my own birth, about how you refused to give up on me. You made it easy, Tabitha said. You were a fighter from the very beginning. In the spring of 1942, Tabitha fell ill with pneumonia. Despite William's best efforts, despite the care of her family, she declined rapidly. On a sunny April morning, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, Tabitha Allen Hampton passed away peacefully at the age of 82. She was buried on the hill beside Wade, completing the family circle. At her funeral, Rose spoke about her mother's strength and compassion, about how she had chosen them when she could have walked away, about how she had built a family through sheer force of will and love. The ranch continued to prosper under Daniel's management, and eventually under his children's management after him. William's children became doctors and teachers, carrying on the family tradition of service. Rose's children became ranchers, stewards of the land. Thomas's children went into business, helping build the communities around them, and through all the generations, the story was told of how it all began. Of a terrible September night in 1885 when a midwife delivered a baby from his dying mother's womb. Of a widowed cowboy who asked her to stay. Of a love that grew in unexpected soil and bloomed into something extraordinary. The portrait of Wade and Tabitha remained in the ranch house's parlor, and the manuscript Tabitha had written was preserved and copied, passed down through the family as a precious heirloom. Mary's grave on the hill was tended faithfully, her memory honored even by great-great-grandchildren who had never known her. And on quiet evenings, when the sun set over the New Mexico desert in shades of gold and orange and pink, those who knew the story would sometimes swear they could see 3 figures on the porch of the old ranch house. A man and 2 women, sitting together in peace, watching over the family they had all helped to create. It was a legacy born of tragedy but nurtured by love. A testament to the power of choosing to stay, of opening your heart to unexpected possibilities, of building something beautiful from broken pieces. The midwife had delivered the cowboy's son, and in doing so, had delivered herself and him into a future neither could have imagined. And in the end, that was the greatest story of all.